The whisper that stopped the king. The vampire king was not supposed to be home. That single fact was the only reason Alara Vale was still alive. Rain lashed violently against the towering windows of Nightfall Manor, each drop striking the glass like a warning that no one seemed to hear. The ancient estate, hidden deep within the black forests beyond the city, usually slept in perfect, aristocratic silence at this hour. The immortals who lived there followed strict schedules. Predictable. Controlled. Tonight everything was wrong. Alara stood frozen near the grand staircase, her thin fingers gripping a linen cloth so tightly that her knuckles burned. Her breath came in shallow, uneven gasps as she pressed herself into the shadow of a velvet curtain. She was only a maid, human, fragile, invisible by design, and invisibility was the only reason she had survived her first year inside a vampire lord's home. Until 10 minutes ago. 10 minutes ago, she had been polishing the corridor outside the king's private study, her head lowered, eyes averted as always. She hadn't meant to look inside. She hadn't meant to hear anything. But the study door had been slightly open. And inside, she had seen betrayal wearing silk and smiles. Lady Seraphina, beautiful, ancient, and publicly betrothed to the vampire king, was standing far too close to Commander Varric, the king's most trusted enforcer. Their voices were low, intimate, dangerous. What froze Alara's blood wasn't the way Seraphina's hand rested on Varric's chest. It was the map spread across the king's desk. The manor's defenses. The blood wards. The ventilation tunnels marked in red ink. A plan. A trap. Alara had turned to flee immediately. She had known better than to linger. Humans who overheard vampire secrets didn't get second chances. That was when the front doors opened. The sound echoed through the hall like a gunshot. A surge of cold power rolled through the manor, so heavy it made Alara's knees nearly buckle. The torches lining the walls flickered violently, reacting to a presence that dominated the night itself. He was home. The vampire king stepped inside, rain dripping from his long black coat, his tall frame filling the entrance like a living shadow. His face was carved with cold perfection, eyes pale and merciless as frozen moonlight. He had ruled the northern covens for centuries, feared by enemies and allies alike. He was not supposed to return for 3 more days. Alara's heart slammed against her ribs as she pressed her back flat against the stone wall, barely daring to breathe. The king inhaled slowly. His expression darkened. He could smell it. Deceit. His gaze snapped toward the corridor leading to his study, his jaw tightening as restrained fury rippled beneath his calm exterior. His steps were silent, predatory, already moving toward bloodshed. Alara didn't think. She moved. She stepped out from the shadows and reached for him. Her fingers wrapped around his arm. The vampire king froze. No servant had ever touched him without permission. No human had ever dared. His eyes dropped to her hand, then to her face, pale, terrified, trembling not with fear of him but fear for him. Alara, he said quietly, her name a warning. Release me. Instead, she lifted a shaking finger to her lips and whispered the words that would change everything. Be quiet, my lord. The world seemed to hold its breath. The king stared at her, stunned. He could hear her heart racing wildly, could feel the warmth of her human skin through his sleeve. She wasn't trying to protect herself. She was trying to protect him. Why? He murmured. Alara didn't answer. She grabbed his hand, his cold, powerful hand, and pulled him into the narrow alcove beneath the staircase. The space was tight, forcing her back against his chest. His presence surrounded her, overwhelming, terrifying, intoxicating. They're waiting for you, she whispered, her voice breaking. Not to welcome you. To end you. His eyes flashed crimson. He moved a step forward, rage flaring, but Alara clutched his coat with desperate strength. If you enter that room, she whispered urgently, you will be helpless within seconds. The king stilled. What do they have? He asked. Alara swallowed. A paralytic mist. Rare. It steals your strength and leaves you conscious while they take everything. Silence fell between them. Slowly, carefully, the vampire king drew her closer into the shadows. Show me, he said. They moved through the manor like ghosts. Where he glided with immortal grace, Alara followed with the silence learned from years of surviving unnoticed. She pointed out the vents, the altered wards, the sealed exits. Every detail confirmed her story. When they reached the edge of the study, voices drifted clearly through the crack in the door. The girl will be useful, Commander Varric said calmly. A willing innocent is required. Alara felt her blood turn cold. The king's gaze flicked to her. Seraphina laughed softly. She worships him. She'll bleed without resistance. Elara realized then, fully brutally, that she wasn't just a witness. She was the sacrifice. And yet, instead of fleeing the manor while she still could, she had waited. She had waited to warn the monster the world feared. The king leaned down, his voice barely a breath against her ear. "You knew they would come for you," he said. Tears slid silently down Elara's cheeks. "I couldn't let them hurt you," she whispered. "You saved my mother's life. You didn't even know I saw the ledger, but I did." Something ancient and heavy shifted behind the king's eyes. That single act of kindness, done without thought, without expectation, had returned to him multiplied. Alarms suddenly screamed through the manor. Red lights bathed the corridor in blood. They had been discovered. "Run," the king commanded, gripping Elara's hand. "From this moment on, you are no longer a servant." He pulled her close, shielding her with his body as chaos erupted around them. "You are under my protection." Bound by blood and silence, the manor erupted into chaos. Sirens wailed through the ancient halls, their mechanical cries clashing violently with centuries-old stone. Crimson emergency lights spun across the walls, turning priceless portraits into distorted ghosts. Doors slammed shut automatically as the security system engaged, sealing corridors, trapping anyone unfortunate enough to be inside. Elara barely had time to gasp before the vampire king swept her into his arms. The world blurred. Wind tore at her hair as he moved within human speed, his boots barely touching the ground. Chandeliers shattered behind them as bolts of magic slammed into the walls, the echoes roaring like thunder. Elara clung to his coat, her face buried against his chest as fear threatened to swallow her whole. She had spent her life being quiet, invisible. Now she was being hunted. They reached the lower levels of the manor just as heavy footsteps thundered from above. Shadows moved fast, too fast for human eyes. Vampires loyal to the coup were closing in. The king kicked open a reinforced door and carried Elara down a narrow spiral staircase carved deep into the earth. Cold stone walls closed in around them as he slammed the door shut behind them and threw a massive iron bolt into place. They were inside the old wine cellar. The space was small, cramped. Racks of ancient bottles lined the walls like silent witnesses. Dust and age clung to the air, thick and suffocating. The king finally set Elara down. She staggered, her legs shaking violently. Her back hit the wine rack, glass rattling softly behind her. Her chest heaved as she tried to breathe through the terror clawing at her throat. "We're trapped, aren't we?" she whispered. The king didn't answer immediately. He was listening. His expression darkened as realization settled over him like a curse. The hidden escape tunnel, sealed decades ago after an earthquake. The exits controlled by traitors. The gas system primed and waiting. Yes, they were trapped. The first blow hit the cellar door with bone-shaking force. Elara screamed. The king moved instantly, placing himself between her and the door. His broad frame filled the space protectively, his body a shield of cold, deadly authority. "Stay behind me," he commanded quietly. Another door shook the door. Wood splintered inward, pale hands clawing through the cracks. Elara's gaze flicked to the vampire king's face and froze. His skin had gone unnaturally pale. His jaw clenched tightly, breath controlled but strained. He was weakened. She realized it then. He hadn't fed. Not recently. "My lord," she whispered, fear twisting into something deeper. "You're hurt." He met her eyes. And for the first time since she had known him, the fear she saw there wasn't for himself. It was for her. "There is a way out," he said slowly. "But it comes at a cost." Another door. The iron hinges screamed. Elara's heart pounded violently. "Tell me." His eyes darkened completely, the faint glow within them pulsing dangerously. "I need blood." Her breath caught. "Human blood," he continued, voice tight with restraint. "Fresh. Willingly given. It would restore my strength, enough to break through them, enough to protect you." The door cracked further. "But," he said hoarsely, stepping closer, "if I take too much, you could die." Elara swallowed. "And if I take enough to survive this," he hesitated, "you will be bound to me." She looked at the door. At the hands reaching for them. At the fate waiting beyond it. Then she looked back at him. The monster the world feared. The king who paid for her mother's surgery without ever asking for thanks. The immortal who had stopped an entire war with mercy instead of bloodshed. She didn't hesitate. Elara reached up and slowly unbuttoned the collar of her uniform, exposing the pale skin of her neck. "Take it," she whispered. "Save us." His breath hitched sharply. "You don't understand what you're offering," he said, voice breaking for the first time in centuries. Once begun, I may not be able to stop. I trust you, she said simply. The cellar door shattered inward. The king growled, a sound of hunger, despair and fury, and pulled Alara against him. His lips brushed her pulse. Forgive me, he breathed. Then his fangs pierced her skin. Pain flared, brief, sharp, then vanished. The world exploded into light. Alara gasped as something far deeper than blood was taken from her. Memories not her own flooded her mind. Battlefields soaked in moonlight. A throne carved from obsidian. Centuries of loneliness, power, responsibility, and regret. She felt his rage, his grief, his crushing solitude. And beneath it all, his fear of losing her. The king tore himself away with a roar, staggering back as crimson light burned through his veins. His eyes glowed brilliantly, veins darkening against his skin as power surged through him like wildfire. Alara slid down the wine rack, but she didn't collapse. She felt alive, connected. She could hear his heartbeat. Slow, heavy, ancient. My lord, she whispered and froze. She hadn't spoken aloud. His head snapped up. You can hear me, he said inside her mind. Her eyes widened. The bond. Stronger than it should have been. Impossible. The cellar door exploded completely as the first traitor stepped inside. The vampire king stepped forward. Invincible. And Alara realized in that moment, she was no longer just a maid. The girl the prophecy named. The corridor outside the wine cellar was a battlefield. Ash drifted through the air like dark snow, settling on cracked stone and shattered sconces. The remains of traitorous vampires littered the floor, their weapons melted, their arrogance reduced to dust. The vampire king stood at the center of it all, unmoving, his presence bending the shadows around him as if the night itself bowed in recognition. Alara watched from behind him, trembling, not from fear but from the overwhelming hum vibrating through her veins. She could still feel him. His strength pulsed through the bond, steady and fierce. Each breath he took echoed inside her chest. Each flicker of his anger sent warmth racing through her limbs. It was terrifying. It was intoxicating. Stay close, his voice sounded inside her mind, calm but iron hard. They will come in waves now. She nodded, forgetting that he didn't need to see it. They moved. The manor that once felt like a prison now felt like a maze of threats. Emergency shutters sealed hallways behind them while others opened without warning, forcing sudden changes in direction. The traitors had prepared well. They knew the king's habits, his routines, his mercy. But they hadn't prepared for Alara. As they turned into the east wing, the air shifted. Alara gasped, clutching her head as pain lanced through her skull. Images flashed behind her eyes. Symbols etched in fire, circles of ancient script spiraling endlessly, voices whispering in a language she had never learned yet somehow understood. Stop, she whispered aloud. The king halted instantly, spinning to face her. What do you see? He demanded. I don't know, she said breathlessly. But this place, it's wrong. There's a ward here. Older than the manor. Her gaze snapped to the wall. Without understanding how, Alara stepped forward and placed her palm against the stone. The whispers grew louder, no longer chaotic but focused, calling to her. The symbols ignited beneath her touch. The ward shattered like glass. The king stared. That spell predates the covens, he said slowly. Only royal blood, or... He stopped. Understanding struck him like a blade. No, he breathed. That's impossible. Before Alara could ask, a figure emerged from the shadows ahead. Lady Seraphina. Her gown was immaculate despite the chaos. Her smile serene and cruel. Power coiled around her like smoke, dark and deliberate. So it's true, Seraphina purred. The bond activated instantly. The king stepped forward, placing himself between Alara and the ancient vampire. You will not take her, he said, his voice carrying lethal finality. Seraphina laughed softly. Take her? Oh, my king, we were waiting for her. Alara's heart sank. Seraphina's gaze slid past him, locking onto Alara with predatory fascination. Do you know why the spell responded to you, little maid? Alara shook her head, fear tightening her throat. Because you were never meant to be invisible, Seraphina continued. You are a catalyst, a living key, a bridge between bloodlines. The king's fury exploded. Silence, he roared. But the truth was already unraveling. Seraphina raised her hand, revealing markings burned into her palm, ancient symbols identical to those Alara had just awakened. The prophecy spoke of a human-born girl, Seraphina said, her voice reverent and hateful all at once. One who could survive a king's bite without turning. One whose blood doesn't submit, it awakens. Elara's knees weakened. That's not possible, she whispered. Serafina smiled wider. Your mother knew. The words hit Elara harder than any blow. My mother? Her voice broke. She was human. So she believed, Serafina replied smoothly. But your bloodline is older than ours. Healers. Guardians. The ones who ended wars by binding kings. The king felt it then. The bond shifted. Deepened. Not ownership. Recognition. Destiny. Before either of them could react, the ground trembled violently. Magic surged as Serafina slammed her hand into the floor, triggering the final phase of the coup. Kill the king, she commanded the shadows. Bring me the girl alive. The hall flooded with enemies. The king moved like a god unleashed. Elara stayed with him, not behind him. She didn't know how she knew what to do. She only knew that when she raised her hand, the air shimmered. When she shouted, the ancient language tore free from her throat, burning through wards and weapons alike. Vampires fell, stunned, disarmed, helpless. The king turned mid-fight, staring at her in shock. Elara, he said inside her mind, awe bleeding into his voice. What are you? She met his gaze, power blazing through her fear. I think, she whispered, I was never meant to be just a maid. Serafina vanished into smoke, retreating, but not defeated. The manor fell silent once more. The king approached Elara slowly, reverently, as if afraid she might disappear. He knelt. A vampire king kneeling before a human girl. You saved me, he said quietly. And now, you've saved the realm. Elara reached for him, her hand trembling. I don't want power, she said. I just want to matter. His fingers closed around hers, gentle, unbreakable. You already do, he replied. More than you can imagine. When protection wasn't enough, the manor did not celebrate victory. It mourned. Dawn crept across Nightfall Manor like an unwanted guest, its pale light revealing the damage left behind. Cracked stone. Burned wards. Ash scattered where powerful vampires had once stood. Servants moved quietly through the halls, their eyes downcast, afraid to speak too loudly in a house that had nearly fallen. Elara stood alone at the tall window of the east wing, her reflection ghosted in the glass. For the first time in her life, no one ignored her. And that frightened her more than the betrayal had. She could feel them now, the vampires watching her from a distance, whispering behind marble pillars and velvet curtains. Fear and reverence tangled together in their stares. Some bowed when she passed. Others recoiled. She was no longer invisible. She was dangerous. You should not be alone, the vampire king said gently from behind her. She hadn't heard him approach, but she felt him. The bond thrummed softly, ever present, like a second heartbeat beneath her own. It was quieter now, controlled but deeper than before. I needed to breathe, Elara said softly. Everything feels loud. He nodded, understanding more than words could explain. The bond amplifies emotions at first. It will settle. She turned to face him, searching his expression. Is that why you're distant? She asked quietly. The question struck him harder than any blade. He straightened, his jaw tightening. I am protecting you. Her hands curled into the fabric of her simple dress. From whom? From myself, he answered honestly. Silence stretched between them, heavy and aching. He took a step back, not away but restrained. Careful. As if one wrong movement might break her. The council will come, he continued. They already know what you are. What you can do. I don't want to be a weapon, Elara whispered. You aren't, he said immediately. You are a choice. That is why they fear you. Footsteps echoed in the hall. An ancient vampire entered, her silver hair braided with ceremonial threads. High Priestess Melira, keeper of laws older than kingdoms. She bowed deeply to the king, then turned her sharp gaze to Elara. The bond is unstable, Melira said bluntly. If left unchecked, it will either destroy her, or enslave him. Elara's breath caught. What does that mean? She asked. Melira's eyes softened, just slightly. It means love alone will not be enough. The king stiffened. There will be no separation. There must be, Melira replied calmly. For a time. The word struck like a death sentence. Elara felt the bond recoil painfully. Panic surged through her chest. No, she said, shaking her head. Please? To stabilize the bond, Melira continued, the girl must choose herself before she can choose the king. The king looked at Elara then, not as a ruler, not as a protector, but as a man terrified of losing the one soul who had changed him. "I will not force this," he said quietly. Elara stepped forward, tears burning her eyes. "If I leave, will you still feel me?" His voice broke inside her mind. Every second. She swallowed hard. "Then I'll go," she whispered. "Not because they command it, but because I need to understand who I am without hiding behind you." Pain flashed across his face, but beneath it, pride. "I will wait," he said. "No matter how long it takes." They stood inches apart, neither touching, both aching with everything unspoken. When Elara turned away, the bond stretched painfully, but did not break. She left the manor that morning as she had arrived months ago. With nothing. Except this time the world knew her name. The queen who chose herself. The world beyond Nightfall Manor was nothing like Elara remembered. The city lights felt too bright. The streets too loud. Humanity moved fast, careless and unaware of how close it lived to monsters and miracles alike. Elara rented a small room above a closed bakery, earning coin by helping an elderly woman restore broken books. Quiet work that suited a girl learning how to exist without hiding. But she was never alone. She felt him in the quiet moments. In the pause between heartbeats. In the ache behind her ribs when night fell. In the warmth that wrapped around her whenever fear crept too close. The bond did not weaken. It steadied. Weeks passed. Then months. And in the shadows of the vampire world, something darker gathered. Lady Seraphina had not fled in defeat. She had fled to prepare. The council convened beneath the old catacombs, their stone thrones cracked and ancient. Seraphina stood before them, weaving lies with practiced elegance, speaking of instability, of a human girl corrupting royal blood, of a king who had grown weak through mercy. The council listened. Then they voted. An execution decree was issued. For Elara Vale. The king felt it the moment the seal was broken. The bond screamed. He rose from his throne without hesitation, fury shaking the ancient hall. "You will not touch her." "They already have," Melira said gravely. "Hunters. Mercenaries." Seraphina promised them power. The king did not call his army. He went alone. But Elara felt it first. The moment the hunters breached her room, she already knew, because the bond no longer whispered. It roared. Steel flashed. Wards shattered. The elderly woman screamed. Elara did not run. She stood. And for the first time she did not ask herself who she was. She knew. The ancient language rose effortlessly from her throat, burning through the air like dawn fire. Symbols flared across the walls. The hunters froze mid-motion, weapons clattering uselessly to the floor as their borrowed magic unraveled. "You came for a servant," Elara said quietly. "But I was never meant to kneel." The door exploded inward. The vampire king arrived like judgment given form. Not frantic. Not desperate. Certain. His eyes locked on Elara, and relief crashed through the bond so powerfully that she nearly staggered. He crossed the room in 2 steps and pulled her into his arms, holding her as if the world itself might try to take her again. "You chose yourself," he whispered into her hair. "And the bond survived." She pulled back just enough to meet his eyes. "So did you." The council arrived moments later, too late to control the narrative. Seraphina was dragged forward, stripped of illusions, her crimes laid bare by Elara's truth-binding gift. The room watched in silence as centuries of manipulation unraveled in seconds. Instant karma. Justice delivered not with cruelty, but clarity. The council knelt. Not to the king. To her. Elara trembled, not with fear but with the weight of choice. She turned to the vampire king. "I won't rule beside you because prophecy demands it," she said softly. "I will only stay if I am seen. As an equal." He sank to one knee. Not in command. In devotion. "I do not want a queen born of destiny," he said. "I want the woman who whispered to me when everyone else stayed silent." She smiled through tears. And took his hand. Nightfall Manor changed after that. Servants were given names. Humans were protected, not hidden. Power answered to compassion. Elara never wore a crown unless she chose to. But when she walked beside the king, the night itself seemed to soften. And the world learned a final lesson. Never judge the quiet girl in the shadows. Because sometimes, she's the one who saves the king.